Episode 6 takes us on a journey through Emma's Wonderland after the unpleasant event as she searches for the Norway forest and introduces us to the people underground. As there's always two ways to see things, we'll be discussing that and much more in today's breakdown of Episode 6 of The Changeling. But first, make sure to share your thoughts on the episode as well as any theories, predictions, and deeper meanings you all took away after watching it, as we have an episode to break down, full spoilers ahead. Aftermath, the consequences of the after effects of a significant unpleasant event, as we see Emma back at the apartment not much longer after the horrific event that night, as she sees a piece of a tree in Brian's crib and breaks a window to escape after hearing the police sirens. As Emma receives a text message from kindergarten as he recites the lines from the book, Emma tosses her phone away and levitates in thin air. I want to address this opening scene and some of the moments of this episode through this character's perspective, as there seems to be two versions of Emma. We see the one version in this episode of her wanting and seeking answers to find her child Brian, as any mother would do in this situation, but then there seems to be this version of Emma, a different version who seems to be disconnected and has these special abilities that we see later in this episode as well, but this ability of her floating in thin air. Does she have control over this power, or is this another side of Emma that she's not even aware of? And secondly, I believe at some point they're going to have to get the help of kindergarten to help them find that mythical forest, which we'll be discussing later in this breakdown. As Emma prepares to sneak on board a ferry, we see her older sister Kim follows her. Now, one would assume that this was the same night in the footage that Apollo saw back in episode 4. Kim tells her younger sister they're going to make it out of this situation, and she proceeds to take her phone out to signal someone awaiting Emma's arrival. She also tells Emma that it's time and they're ready for you. This is the only shot you got to figure out if any of this is real. Now, Emma cuts her off by saying she's just like their mother and she doesn't want her sisters to doubt her. Now, Emma wants Kim to go with her, but she can't because she has to do this alone. As Kim says to Emma, you know what she said, and I'm assuming she's referring to Cal. And I want to focus on Kim here for a second because I personally don't believe that Kim is a witch, nor do I believe she knows a ton of information exactly what's going on. Now, going back to episode 2, this is the moment where I believe, and I'm referring to when Emma took her older sister Kim to get those chains for baby Brian, I believe Emma told Kim about what she believed in the Changeling and eventually told her about Cal and this island being a way to help her and save Brian, and also getting her up to speed about this exact meeting that we're seeing in this very scene. Now, the question is, Kim, I personally believe that the reason she believes her younger sister is because of what they experienced as they were kids with their mother burning up the house, and there might be inkling or something that Kim believes regarding witches and fairy tales, things of that nature. Let me know in the comments if you all believe that, number one, is Kim a witch? Is she not a witch? But also, do you believe that Kim knows more about what's exactly happening in this situation? As Kim tells Emma, I gotta let you go to get you back. She can't let her burn for this as she throws her sister in the water. Now, the line, I can't let you burn for this, is that a reference to their mother burning in their house. And since we're on the topic of Kim and Emma's mom, do we believe that she attempted to kill her whole family because maybe their mother thought that Emma was maybe different? Maybe she was possibly a changeling at one point and she didn't want to make that tough decision that Emma and the other mothers had to make, and she couldn't live with the idea of killing one of her family members, so she decided to kill the whole family instead in that fire. As Emma arrives to the island and meets Cal in person for the first time, immediately she asks what happened to her son, as Cal wants to know what did Emma see after she did what she was asked of her. Now, Emma responds by saying that she was told that once she got rid of that thing, all would become clear and she would have a second chance, as Emma feels that Brian is still alive out there and she just wants to know where he is. Now, at this point, Emma just wants to go back, but Cal doesn't allow it, and she puts her in the same holding cell as Apollo and kindergarten. See that she's kind of in an attack mode, but they ultimately put her to sleep. Now, going back to that what did you see line, what is it that they see? I'm so curious about the whole ritual or practice of removing the changeling and what all goes into that besides knowing that there's some hot boiling water involved. And what comes of the body once it's done, because it seems like the body remains of baby Brian were left in the apartment. So does the soul of the real person like go back to a body? Does Brian body, real body, stay intact, and is it somewhere in the forest? Does the changeling work like the glimmer spell, as it was explained to Apollo? Once it's removed, you get the actual person back. I'm just so curious about if we're going to actually see a ritual or a routine, see a mother in action of doing that. I'm very curious if we're going to see it, whether it's in Emma's perspective at some point later in episode 7 or 8, or another mother perform the same thing, and I'm referring to another mother as Apollo's mother, Lillian. More on that later. As we see, Emma is almost in like this dreamlike state. She reads the book as Apollo voices reads a line that seems to be pointing towards a huge clue about hiding in the forest and being lost. She sees dirt in a piece of a tree again, which definitely tells me that baby Brian is most likely held captive by the fairies in the wild as these arms from the tree reach out to Emma. See Emma awaking, it is becoming more and more clear that the location that was referred to in last week's episode by Cal and a lot throughout this episode has to be in the wild, and it's probably most likely like another realm where humans can't find it, very similar to the island, and this might be where those other missing children are kept to eventually be eaten. Cut to the next morning where we see Emma's hand that picked up that boiling pot has magically healed, but also you'll notice that she's wearing her wedding ring, which to me means that she's still in love with Apollo. She leaves the message from Apollo that he found in last week's episode. Kyle arrives and tells Emma that she's been out for a while and that none of the women on this island have never found their children, including Kyle herself. Now Emma assures Kyle that Brian is very different and that if Apollo is alive that he's going to find her, which you know is a great callback to last week, as Emma wants to go to a library to study books on trees. Now, I really enjoyed these scenes of Emma and Cal getting to kind of know each other and fill each other out. As you can tell that Emma is most likely slightly different from the other women that were brought to this island, and Cal's not used to this kind of pushback that she's getting from her, as Emma tells her that she doesn't like the TED Talks that she's given her. Just seeing this perspective of how Cal and Apollo interacted from when we met these characters for the first time in episode 4, Apollo and Emma, they just seem to be different than what Cal has come across, not only to find their child but also finding each other. So again, the callback of them being hard-headed people is so great because we see that Emma and Apollo are determined to come back to each other as a family. As Emma searches through the woods on the island and recites more and more of the lines from the book,
fairies will hold it close to their breasts. They won't give it back. They love it the best.
Emma meets the mother of the young girl that Apollo met last week and questions her about the boat and where it's being kept, as she eventually gives her the location of where this boat is. Emma finds the location and breaks in and takes the boat and tries to leave but has no luck in doing so and almost drowns. Then she starts to think about all the beautiful moments that she had with Apollo and her family, and including Brian. This goes back to that strength and that will that Cal was talking about, and she gets back up to the surface and ultimately into that boat. Now, it was at this point in the episode, we're about 20 minutes into the episode, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm not really all that involved in this episode so far. Like, I don't know if we need this perspective through Emma's eyes. Then it kind of hit me that the meaning of this episode, and then particularly in this scene, parallels in the same moments that Apollo experienced when he first arrived on this island. This scene here being like almost a mirror image of what happened to Apollo. Remember, Apollo was almost drowned, but he started to remember what he's fighting for, which is his family, and he has that same will that Emma has as they want their family back. Emma's doing the exact same thing, so it might be a little bit on the nose. The show is just showing us the importance of the family for these characters, and also just considering how both of them had traumatic experiences when they were children and they want to have a different experience for their family. Eventually arrives back to New York and heads to the library as promised. She brings back some books that can help her. Now Emma sees the news talking about Apollo surviving, and it's nothing short of a god that he survived, and she knew at that point to me that he would be determined to find her again. Now, to Cal's surprise, she finds Emma has returned because, as Emma said, she has nowhere to go, but she also wants to be here with people that experience the same thing that she's going through. I don't know if you all noticed all the Alice in Wonderland connections in this episode. One being this scene here when Emma brings the books back. She actually gives a book to Cal where we see her reading to the children, and that is Alice in the Wonderland. Also, we'll talk about it later, we get a character that is very similar to the Hatter, as we'll talk about with Mr. Will's character. Gail's mother and Emma have a conversation about if she ever found anything in her baby's crib, particularly any dirt or any soil. She reveals that every now and then she would find those items, but also a singular leaf. Now, she never kept this leaf, but she ends up drawing it for Emma. Again, leaves, dirt, all signs point towards all of our answers can be found in the wild. As the leaf drawn for her magically falls into her hand and she sees the tree it came from, and she hugs this tree and thanks it. Now, I could be wrong, but to me that was a callback to the tree moment when she was in the Brazil and that tree cut her for not asking properly if she can eat from it. To me, this is just more signs of Emma being more connected with the world. Now, the tree is revealed to be the Norway maple, which is an invasive species and very aggressive and a sneaky tree. Dense shade makes it virtually impossible for grass to grow under the tree. Now, I know it's not a coincidence that it happens to be a Norway maple tree, because we know how important Norway and Norwegians have been so far in this show. We see Emma threatens to kill Cal in order to get the internet access to continue her research. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I know she's our main character, and of course, for the sake of the plot, we know that she has to find answers by any means necessary, but Cal allowing her to take control, to me, just kind of lessens her in this situation as an actual leader. Then I started to think about it a little bit more. Maybe this is an example of a power shift or a different power and dynamic, showing that Cal sees how powerful Emma actually is, and maybe her power surpassed her, and we'll talk about it a little bit later when Emma was going away from the island. I think that Cal sees that it is a possibility that Emma is no witch to mess with. Cal gives her a better route to the city as Emma arrives to this new location, and I love the use of the camera kind of panning upside down, almost similar to when we saw Apollo crossing the bridge, but you'll notice that Emma's body, if this is a new realm, didn't reject it the same way that Apollo's did. I believe, just like the island, that this particular new location under the ground is almost maybe protected under a spell. You can only be invited to this little location or this new realm as we meet this new character by the name of Wills, who to me definitely is the Hatter of the situation. He's literally wearing a hat, he speaks in riddles, and he drinks tea as he is a part and the leader of the Mole People. In our reality, Mole People, also known as tunnel people or tunnel dwellers, are homeless people living under large cities in abandoned subways, railroads, flood sewage tunnels, and heat shafts. This is a way that the show is kind of connected into our reality of these people that have been lost, abandoned, or forgotten by society. As we get to see the layout of what they call the Grand Central Community, they're always been underground. They have no segregation of people. People are welcome of all colors and backgrounds, and they have a whole different world down here. Again, this is definitely giving me fairy tale vibes or Alice in the Wonderland as he shows her all his interesting things. Did you all know originally that it was going to be titled Alice Adventures Underground, which to me just gives this even more meaning. Emma eventually makes her way to the surface and she's online searching where she can find all the locations of the Norway maple trees in New York, but one of the employees of the library arrived a little bit sooner than expected as we see Emma has to hide from her. Now, in hiding, she begins to hear screaming upstairs, and this is a great kind of callback. Again, the whole theme of this episode is there's two sides of the story. So we see the other side of the situation where Emma sees Apollo from the time he held the gun to the librarians, as we see that she was eventually chased out by the police but manages to escape on Will's bike. Emma gives him the book that he requested for in exchange for helping her. Will suggests that she starts with Little Norway. Now, this was started in 1825. Those were the first immigrants arrived there, and they happened to have a forest. This reference here of 1825 being the first immigrants of Little Norway, to me, connects to the same people from episode 1 who were traveling across the seas to arrive at this location. Now, as far as the timeline goes, we see that Emma tells Mr. Wills that she wants to meet him the following night. So to me, in my head canon, I believe that everything we saw in the previous episode kind of lines up to where Emma is. So we might have, and I'm going to talk about this a little later at the end of this video, Cal might suggest to Apollo that he go visit Wills, and this is where he might be reunited with Emma. As we end the episode with Emma having given more books to the library, and she begins her journey to find Brian, and she won't be seen again if she does ultimately find him. As Emma gives Cal the book that she eventually gave Apollo. Now, this is a very interesting line, and it kind of confused me. Let's break it down. As Emma tells Cal to give Apollo the book, and this is where it gets interesting, she also tells Cal to tell Brian, who is Apollo's father, that Apollo wished he could have read the book to him more when he was growing up. Now, I could be wrong, but I took that as when she said Brian, she was not talking about baby Brian, because obviously they don't know where he is, but she was referring to the adult of Brian, the father of Apollo, which to me means he's alive, and Emma knows about this, and also Cal knows about this.
My husband was obsessed with it. Will's dad used to read it to him when he was little. Well, tell Brian, Apollo was so looking forward to doing the same.
Did I read that wrong? Let me know your thoughts on that, as Emma is off to find Brian in the forest of the Norway as she says her goodbyes to Cal, who brought her to rest and to get her mind right so she can clearly see things better, because there are always two sides of seeing things. As Emma sails away, we see this bluish glow surrounding her as Mama is coming for her son. Was that a protection spell that Emma put on herself? Again, not knowing she has these abilities or being very aware of what she's able to do and what she's capable of. Is this just like maybe a natural aura that's always been surrounding her, just showing how powerful of a witch Emma actually is? So obviously that brings the question up, where is Brian? Was he in the grand community and we just didn't see him? Has he been looking for Apollo this whole time? So is it safe to assume that Brian's going to be in the Norway forest? He's with his people, his Norwegian bloodline. As I talked about in my theory last week, that I believe it is all in the bloodline, that Apollo has that Norwegian in his bloodline. That's what kind of created Brian, baby Brian, becoming that changeling, which on the point of the family of Brian, Apollo, and Lillian, where has she been? We haven't seen her in a couple weeks, but more importantly, the red suitcase scenario. Going back to me connecting this episode to Alice in the Wonderland, tying the red suitcase to who could be the Red Queen in this situation. Can we trust Lillian? Was Brian trying to save their son from her? Could it be a similar situation where Lillian is a similar witch to the one in Brazil? Remember, there's always two sides of the story. We've only seen her side of the story, which makes me go into the Kim of it all. Do we know her involvement? Also, Patrice. What I like about this episode, it wasn't as exciting or frightening as last week's episode, but I love how this continues to move the story forward. As Emma learns more about things, so do we. It's safe to assume that Emma has found this magical, mythical forest, and Apollo's headed that way as well, and maybe Brian can be found there as well. And this might be a little bit too on the nose, but the truth is there are two sides of the story, and I love that theme going throughout the episode. We saw Apollo's side of the story of him dealing with the situation. Now we get to see Emma's side of the story, which adds more depth, it adds more layers, it adds more perspective to the character. But also, again, what is it about Kim? What is her side of the story? What is Lillian's side, and what we think is it's a truthful side? What does Brian have to do with all this? I'm referring to the adult version of Brian. So again, two sides of the story. Can we trust the characters that we've trusted so far? Very, very interesting theme, and I'm really liking where that's headed. So overall, a solid episode. Again, I preferred last week, but a solid episode nonetheless. But hey, those are my thoughts. Those are my theories. I hope you all enjoyed today's breakdown, and if you have some thoughts, theories, predictions, make sure to leave them in the comments below. Again, I want to thank you all for watching today's breakdown of episode 6 of The Changeling. Before we wrap it all up, consider hitting the like button, sharing today's breakdown, leaving your thoughts in the comments, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell, helping me reach my next milestone of 60,000 subscribers. You all are awesome. Hope you're staying safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.